It was a day that would change everything at Oak Ridge Community. Not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a pool gate. The video you're about to watch isn't just another viral moment. It's about power, prejudice, and what happens when someone finally says, enough. But most importantly, it's about a mother and son who turned an ugly incident into a masterclass in dignity and justice. Calvin Clayton stood at the entrance of the Oak Ridge Community Pool, his reflection wavering in the crystalline water beyond the fence. At 14, he carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that made adults do a double-take, straight back, clear-eyed, and thoughtful. His navy blue swim trunks and team swim bag marked him as someone who belonged in the water, even if certain people thought he didn't belong in this neighborhood. The late June heat pressed down like a heavy blanket, making the cool blue water beyond the gate even more inviting. Children's laughter echoed across the pool deck, mixing with the rhythmic splash of swimmers and the faint scent of sunscreen and chlorine. For Calvin, this should have been just another summer afternoon. Instead, it would become a moment that would rack up millions of views and spark conversations across the country. But let's back up. 3 weeks earlier, Calvin and his mother had moved into one of Oak Ridge's elegant colonial-style homes on Pinewood Lane. The move represented more than just a change of address. It was supposed to be their fresh start. His mother, Jasmine Clayton, had recently made history as the state's first black female governor. But to Calvin, she was still just Mom, the woman who quizzed him on math problems over breakfast and always kept chocolate chip cookies in her office for their late-night talks. Having her as a mentor was great, but also the pool visit wasn't Calvin's idea originally. His new neighbor Marcus had convinced him during their morning basketball game. "You've got to check it out," Marcus had insisted, bouncing the ball against the driveway. "Best pool in the county. Plus, Sarah Jenkins is usually there, and word is she's been asking about you." He'd wiggled his eyebrows suggestively, making Calvin laugh and shove him playfully. So here he was, taking that first step through the gate, completely unaware that someone was watching him with eyes that saw not a teenager looking for a swim, but an intruder who needed to be confronted. Encouraged by the prospect of a future trip and the chance to communicate, Breek returned to his office after his daily paper routine. Linda Harrington sat in her usual spot, a premium lounge chair positioned perfectly for pool surveillance, as some residents sarcastically called it. At 53, Linda considered herself the unofficial guardian of Oak Ridge's standards. Her family had lived in the community for 3 generations, and she took that legacy seriously, perhaps too seriously. When Linda spotted Calvin entering the pool area, her reaction was immediate. Her manicured fingers gripped her phone tighter, her lips pressing into a thin line. She didn't recognize him, and in Linda's world, that was enough to sound the alarm. "Excuse me?" Linda's voice cut through the ambient pool noise like a knife. "Young man?" "Yes, you." She was already rising from her chair, her floral cover-up fluttering as she moved with purpose toward Calvin. "I'm going to need to see your pool pass." Calvin turned, his hand still on the gate. "Oh, hi," he said, his voice steady and polite. "I actually just moved here with my mom. We're on Pinewood Lane." Linda's perfectly penciled eyebrows arched higher. "Pinewood Lane?" Her tone made it clear she didn't believe him. "I know everyone on Pinewood Lane, young man, and I've never seen you before." Around them, the pool atmosphere began to shift. A few heads turned. The lifeguard, a college student more interested in his phone than the water, glanced up briefly before looking away. Parents adjusted their sunglasses, pretending not to watch while seeing everything. "We moved in 3 weeks ago," Calvin explained, maintaining his composure. "The blue Colonial at 1542. I can show you." "What I need to see," Linda interrupted, her voice rising slightly, "is proper identification or a pool pass. Otherwise, I'll have to ask you to leave. This is a private facility." The way she emphasized private made Calvin's stomach tighten. He recognized that tone. It was the same one he'd heard at his old school, when the security guard had followed him through the halls, claiming he didn't look like he belonged there. But Calvin wasn't about to let anyone make him feel small. His mother had taught him better than that. "Ma'am, he said, his voice firm but respectful. "I live here. I have every right to be at this pool." That's when Linda pulled out her phone, her fingers already dialing. "We'll let security decide about that." The security guards arrived within minutes. Two men in crisp beige uniforms who moved with the practiced efficiency of people used to dealing with situations. The taller one, Officer Reynolds, carried a clipboard. His partner, Officer Martinez, already had his hand on his radio, as if expecting trouble. Calvin felt his heart rate quicken, but he remembered his mother's words from countless dinner conversations. "Stand your ground with grace. Your dignity is not up for debate." He straightened his shoulders, facing the approaching guards with calm determination. "We received a call about an unauthorized individual," Officer Reynolds began, his eyes flicking between Calvin and Linda. His tone was professional but carried an edge of presumption that made Calvin's jaw tighten. Linda jumped in before Calvin could speak. "He claims he lives on Pinewood Lane," she said, emphasizing claims in a way that made several nearby parents shift uncomfortably in their chairs. "But he has no ID, no pool pass, nothing to prove he belongs here." The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Calvin stood his ground. A drop of sweat rolled down his back, but he wasn't sure if it was from the heat or the situation. Around them, the pool had grown quieter. Even the kids seemed to sense the tension, their splashing becoming more subdued. "My name is Calvin Clayton," he said, his voice clear and steady. "I live at 1542 Pinewood Lane. I moved here with my mother 3 weeks ago." Officer Martinez's radio crackled with static. "Without proper identification," he began, but Calvin was already pulling out his phone. "I can call my mom," he said, his fingers moving across the screen. "She can verify everything." Linda let out an exaggerated sigh. "Oh, please. If he really lived here, he'd have proper documentation. We can't just have people walking in off the street claiming what, exactly?" The new voice cut through the tension like a thunderclap. Everyone turned toward the parking lot, where a sleek black Audi had pulled up. Governor Jasmine Clayton stepped out, her presence commanding immediate attention. She wore a tailored navy suit that somehow looked pristine despite the summer heat, and her expression could have frozen fire. The reaction was immediate. Officer Reynolds' clipboard lowered slightly. Officer Martinez's hand dropped from his radio. Linda's face, already flushed from the heat, turned an impossible shade of red. "Mom," Calvin said, relief evident in his voice despite his composed exterior. Governor Clayton's heels clicked against the concrete as she approached, each step deliberate and measured. The crowd around the pool had grown completely silent, phones discreetly emerging to capture what was unfolding. "I'd like someone to explain," she said, her voice carrying the same measured authority she used in state assembly meetings, "why my son is being treated like a criminal for trying to use his community pool." Linda stepped forward, her previous confidence crumbling under the governor's steady gaze. "Governor Clayton, I had no idea he was your son. We have to be careful about security, and when I didn't recognize him—" "When you didn't recognize him," Governor Clayton interrupted, "you assumed he didn't belong here. Instead of introducing yourself, welcoming a new neighbor, or simply asking his name, you immediately called security." She turned to the officers, who seemed to be wishing they could disappear into the concrete. "And you too. Did either of you ask for his address, check the resident directory? Or did you just see a situation where someone had already decided my son didn't belong and choose to reinforce that assumption?" The silence that followed was deafening. Even the pool filter seemed to hum more quietly. A young mother near the shallow end pulled her children closer, whispering something in their ears that made them look at Linda with confused expressions. She looked at them and said, "Governor," Officer Reynolds finally spoke, his voice strained. "We were just responding to a call about..." "About what?" Governor Clayton's voice was sharp but controlled. "About a black teenager trying to swim in his own community pool? Let's not pretend this is about anything else." Linda had begun to back away, gathering her things with trembling hands. "I never meant... I was just trying to protect..." "Protect what, Miss Harrington? And from whom?" Governor Clayton's questions hung in the air like storm clouds. Because from where I'm standing, the only person creating a disturbance here is you. The moment hung in the air like summer lightning, crackling with tension and possibility. Governor Clayton stood between her son and Linda, not just as a mother protecting her child, but as a leader confronting the kind of everyday injustice that shaped too many lives. "I should go," Linda mumbled, clutching her designer beach bag to her chest like a shield. But Governor Clayton wasn't finished. "No, Ms. Harrington, I think you should stay. We all should. Because this moment isn't just about my son or your actions. It's about every person who's ever been made to feel they don't belong in spaces that are rightfully theirs." Around the pool, people began to stir. A teenage girl lowered her phone, tears visible in her eyes. An elderly man in the corner slowly removed his hat, his expression heavy with recognition. Even the lifeguard had descended from his perch, standing awkwardly by his chair with his head bowed. "Mom," Calvin said softly, touching his mother's arm. But Governor Clayton gently squeezed his hand, her eyes never leaving Linda. "You see, Ms. Harrington, when you questioned my son's right to be here, you weren't just challenging his pool access. You were telling him and everyone watching that some people need to prove their humanity more than others, that some residents are more resident than others, that some children are more deserving of a summer afternoon swim than others." Linda's face had lost all color. I never meant. I didn't think." "That's precisely the problem," Governor Clayton continued, her voice gaining strength. "You didn't think about how it feels to be 14 and have adults treat you like a criminal. You didn't think about the message you were sending to every child watching this unfold. You didn't think about the weight of history that makes your actions not just uncomfortable, but deeply harmful." A woman in a red swimsuit stood up from her lounge chair, her voice trembling. "She's right. I watched this whole thing happen and said nothing. I'm so sorry, Calvin. That wasn't right." Like a dam breaking, others began to speak up. "I should have said something too. This isn't what our community stands for. We need to do better." Officer Reynolds stepped forward, removing his cap. "Governor Clayton, young man, I want to apologize. We responded to this situation with bias, not professionalism. That's not what we're here for, and it's not what this community needs from us." His partner nodded vigorously. "We'll be reviewing our protocols. This kind of profiling won't happen again." The pool manager, who had been hovering nervously at the edge of the gathering, finally found his voice. "Governor Clayton, I'd like to apologize on behalf of the facility. We'll be implementing new training procedures for all staff, and we'll make sure every resident feels welcome here." Linda stood frozen, her carefully maintained facade crumbling, as the community she'd appointed herself to protect turned to face her instead. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't the tears of someone caught in wrongdoing. They were the tears of someone beginning to see themselves clearly for the first time. "Shh," she started, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've lived here my whole life. My parents lived here. I thought I was protecting something important. But I was wrong. I was so wrong." She turned to Calvin, her shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry. What I did was inexcusable." Calvin looked at his mother, then back at Linda. His response was measured, mature beyond his years. "I accept your apology, Ms. Harrington. But I hope you understand that this isn't just about me. It's about making sure this never happens to anyone else." Governor Clayton placed a proud hand on her son's shoulder, addressing the crowd that had gathered. "This is how change happens, not just through laws or policies, but through moments like these, when we confront our biases, acknowledge our mistakes, and commit to doing better." The afternoon sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the pool deck. The water reflected the golden light, rippling with possibilities of what this community could become. Someone started to clap, and the applause spread like waves across the pool area. As the applause faded, a transformation was already taking place. Parents who had been silent observers began introducing themselves to Calvin and his mother. Children returned to the pool, but now their games included everyone. The invisible barriers that had divided the space moments ago seemed to dissolve in the late afternoon light. Linda remained, though her usual commanding presence had diminished. She watched as several residents approached Calvin, offering not just apologies but invitations to summer barbecues, pool parties, community events. Each gesture was a small step toward healing, toward building the kind of neighborhood they all claimed to want but hadn't fought hard enough to create. The pool manager cleared his throat, addressing the gathering. Starting tomorrow, we're implementing new policies. Every resident will receive the same welcome, the same respect, no questions asked. We're also forming a community advisory board to ensure we're truly serving everyone. He turned to Governor Clayton. We'd be honored if Calvin would consider being our youth representative. Calvin's eyes widened slightly, but before he could respond, the lifeguard stepped forward. And I'd like to offer free swim lessons to any kids who want them. Calvin, your mom mentioned you were on your old school swim team. Maybe you could help sometimes? A slow smile spread across Calvin's face. I'd like that, he said, then glanced at his mother. If it's okay? Governor Clayton nodded, her expression soft with pride. Of course. But first, she turned to address everyone present, her voice carrying the weight of both authority and compassion. Let's understand what happened here today. This isn't just about making amends or implementing new policies. It's about recognizing that change requires more than good intentions. It requires action, vigilance, and the courage to speak up when we see injustice. She paused, looking at each face in the crowd. My son showed remarkable composure today, but he shouldn't have had to. No child should have to justify their existence in their own community. No person should have to prove they belong in spaces that are rightfully theirs. Linda stepped forward, her voice quiet but clear. Governor Clayton is right. I've lived here so long I thought I knew what was best for this community. But today showed me that what I thought was protecting our neighborhood was actually destroying what makes a community worth protecting. Our ability to welcome, to grow, to change. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Some residents had brought out their phones, recording the moment. Others were already forming groups, discussing plans for community events, mentoring programs, and educational initiatives. Calvin turned to his mother, speaking softly. Mom, can we stay? I'd actually like to swim now. Governor Clayton smiled, the kind of smile that carried both joy and determination. Of course, baby. That's why we came. As Calvin headed toward the pool, several kids his age called out to him, waving him over. The sound of laughter and splashing filled the air once again. But it was different now, fuller, more inclusive, more real. Linda watched for a moment longer, then gathered her things quietly. But before she left, she approached Governor Clayton one last time. I know it's not enough, she said. But I'm truly sorry, and I want to help make things right. Governor Clayton studied her for a moment. Change starts with acknowledgement, Ms. Harrington. What matters now is what we do tomorrow and the day after that. As the story of what happened at Oak Ridge Community Pool spread across social media, it sparked conversations in communities across the country. The video of Governor Clayton confronting bias head-on, of a community choosing to face its prejudices rather than deny them, became more than just another viral moment. It became a reminder that justice often begins in small places. At pool gates, in neighborhood parks, in everyday moments when people choose to stand up and say, "This is not who we are. This is not who we want to be." Calvin's story didn't end that day at the pool. In many ways, it was just beginning. That summer, he became known not as the governor's son who was questioned at the pool, but as Calvin, the kid who taught swimming lessons on Saturdays, who helped organize the community's first cultural festival, who showed everyone that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply be yourself, in a world that questions your right to exist. And as for Oak Ridge Community, they learned that true change doesn't come from policies alone, but from people willing to examine their hearts, acknowledge their mistakes, and work together to build something better. This isn't just a story about a pool incident. It's a story about what happens when communities choose growth over fear, understanding over ignorance, and unity over division. It's a reminder that every moment carries the potential for transformation, if we're brave enough to seize it. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that matter, because sometimes the most powerful changes start with a single moment of truth.